Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture, talking about the journey, and right now we're talking about specific programs. Felipe, I'd like to throw it over to you and tell us about a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to an implementation that's underway or has already been completed.
It's never complete, right? Zero
That's
trust.
Right. That's right. That's the answer I always get.
That's right. So, zero trust is very much like maintaining your mental, spiritual, and physical fitness, right? That's once you attain that, you've got to keep it. So one of the agencies we're working with has been leveraging a very large network modernization effort to deploy zero trust architecture capabilities to gain access into what exactly is on the network, devices that they didn't know were there, devices that are behaving differently than what they assumed. It was one thing to have an inventory of devices that were once procured for a certain reason. And then it's another to actually see what they're doing once they're on the network. And so what we're doing is we're bringing that to the visibility of the entire organization, all the way up to the CIO level. And they're able to now make an assessment of how they want to adapt some of the technologies they have already to incorporate into decisions about access and further access to data that those devices and applications have, to making procurement decisions once they're ready and have budgeting, to also incorporate that into how the devices and how the data flows that they need to actually have are utilized on the network.
Yeah, when these agencies do this inventory, they realize they have a lot of these pieces and parts. The memo sort of laid down some clarity for them, and now they're just snapping it all in, tying it together. Donna, how about up at Department of State? Again, you all are well on your way here. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to the overall architecture of zero trust architecture.
So one of the pillars that we decided to focus on, in addition to identity management, is the data pillar. About 3 weeks ago, I commissioned a program with our chief data officer, and it's a cyber data campaign, really honing in on identifying the proper nomenclature for the data, because in IT, we have so much data that's coming in. And so we have to have a way to actually normalize the data so that these products and tools that we have can actually do the analysis on the data, look at the behavioral patterns. And so I've been working really closely with the CDO to do that across the board at State Department, because as you know, one of the critical pillars in zero trust, when you have the adversary, they're not coming in, as you said, to just, peek around. They're coming in to look at your data. And especially at the State Department, we have so many different data sets that the adversary is just interested in because it's so rich in data. And we're working on national security strategies, the whole gamut. So we decided to really hone in on, how to really protect the data, but really normalize the data so that it can be protected.
Yeah, I know. The reality is every one of these agencies is a gold mine, plethora of data that any bad actor would love to get their hands on and exploit it. Mark, how about over to Lumio? Can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight?
Sure. We've been working for about 1.5 years at Lumio with the Department of the Air Force and what they're calling CNAP, which is the Cloud Native Access Point, and that's their zero trust security stack. Interestingly enough, I know a few folks on the call are talking about ICAM, and that's important. And certainly that's one of the pillars of zero trust. But what we're finding working with the Air Force is that before they're implementing ICAM, it's actually more important, as maybe even Felipe said, to get the visibility first, right? I think Felipe at Fortinet is coming at it from the network security focus on visibility. What we're doing at Lumio and with the Air Force is coming at it with visibility on the applications and workloads, so on the back end of the network, right? This is the area that most users don't see, right? Most people will log into a network, user to application, and then on the back end, all these things are happening that folks don't really know are going on, but is an attack vector. So what we're doing with the Air Force is we're giving that visibility. They're calling network discovery, right? And then we're starting to roll out microsegmentation with them. And interestingly enough, one of the Space Force customers, when we put Lumio onto the network. Within 10 minutes, they were able to say unauthorized connections on a classified network that they didn't know that were there. They were able to shut those down, right, by turning some ports off. And then the ones that they needed to leave on, they were able to micro segment. And then what we do is we create labels, and then IP addresses follow the labels. Traditionally, you have to keep track of the IP addresses, but those change on a regular basis. And the time that you try to keep track of that is also an attack vector for sophisticated attackers. So what we do is we have these labels where the IP address follows the labels, and then working with companies, in this case for the Air Force, it's AppGate, and they're actually then can reference our labels and not the IP addresses. So what they do is they dynamically adjust entitlements. So right away, we have the inside out, outside in, and now we've actually locked down the attack vector to prevent north, south, and east-west lateral movement. The long story short in that is the Air Force is getting much faster results by going through this approach and starting with visibility from the application and workload perspective, doing the micro-segmentation, and then starting to do the network security stack.
Yeah, and no doubt, every one of these CISOs, as soon as they started to put heavy instrumentation in their environment, way back in their careers, and those environments start to light up like a Christmas tree. They've been on that treadmill ever since, trying to pull it all together. Eric, why don't you give us an example of a specific entity, specific area you'd like to bring to our attention in regards to the overall progress of your zero trust architecture implementation?
Yeah, thanks. So like Rob, we're very focused right now on enterprise identity and access management, but kind of also like Donna, we're also working on data, right, and making sure that we're tagging our data and we're tagging it at the right level, that we can really more granularly define the attributes necessary to control access to the right data. Luke, as you mentioned earlier, INA has a unique mission in the IC in that we're charged with sharing sensitive data, some unclassified, some classified, with state, local, tribal, territorial governments to make sure that critical information is getting to those that need it in order to protect things like critical infrastructure. So we do have a unique mission in that regard. So we also have then a large footprint of folks that we need to ensure that we're giving the right data to the right people and not sharing what we shouldn't with the wrong people. So those are our two biggest focus areas moving forward, and areas that we've been making progress against lately.
Wide user base, if you will, that you're dealing with there, and super sensitive information. So that's a very unique challenge as you're rolling out this architecture, no doubt. We like to talk about priorities, and we want to focus on that. Rob, I'm going to start with you. I know there's a lot of different pieces of this. You got all these different pillars. You're snapping these different things together. Tell us what your priorities are for this year. At the end of this year, sort of what do you want to have screwed down?
Luke, I smile when you say, what are your priorities? I mean, we've got a laundry list of things that we're doing, but just a few of those from a security perspective. So one of the things we're doing is we're continuing to focus on our event log collection. You had Memo 2131, which was released in August of last year. What we're doing is, looking at it closely to say, hey, what are we going to do with this influx of logs? How do we make sense of it all? You say light up like a Christmas tree. We've implemented a lot of capabilities and tools, so we're getting a lot of alerts. One of my big concerns is burnout with my, SOC analysts and what they need to really hone in on. So we're really focused on reducing those alerts, tuning some of the capabilities, and expanding, the collection of our event logs. A couple other things: automation. We're going to continue work to mature our SOAR capability, security orchestration, automation, and response. AI. Artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning. Right now, we've got a pilot that we just started last week where we're looking at our event log data and what we can glean from that using machine learning. And then finally, we've already talked about it, but the big push for us is going to be in identity. And then also looking at our data flows and behavior of access to applications so we can better support our operations.
Right, that broad challenge of finding the needle in a stack of needles and doing it at machine speed. Automation, only way to sort of solve that problem. And speaking of automation and tool sets, et cetera, Felipe, let me go over to you, Felipe, in regards to just highlighting what you're seeing as far as priorities that are coming in from the agencies.
Yep, certainly. So, the next step after visibility is to implement the Zero Trust Network Access capability. It's the core capability, I think, and maybe the major change in terms of how technically Zero Trust is applied from the architecture and the strategies that are derived. So what we're seeing now is after we've delivered some visibility to devices and applications and data flows, Zero Trust Network Access specifically is being implemented for any users or devices in which that is feasibly possible. And also incorporating additional intelligence gleaned from continuous diagnostics and mitigation systems such as EDRs to apply that visibility, that analysis as to what's actually the end state of those devices and users into the access decision dynamically and in real time.
A lot of focus there, a lot of different moving parts. Donna, you're on a tear over there. A lot of different activities. What are your priorities for this year that you're trying to get pinned down?
So thank you for asking. So one of the main priorities that we're really trying to pin down is our identity access management, really taking a look at our MFA and how we have it deployed.
Shields up, right?
There you go. 2209 talks about phishing resistant MFA, right? So, we all have to go back, take a look at, do we have phishing resistant MFA? And what does that really mean for the environment? What changes to our customers will they see once we really deploy that? And then the other thing is supply chain risk management. That's a huge thing. One of the things that we always miss, when we're putting products on the network, we're really not looking at the supply chain and looking at the SBOM. And so really honing in on that and developing that a lot more. And then the other thing we're looking at is, in addition to that, is our data strategy campaign that we're working on with the chief data officer, is normalizing the data, because as we all know, as the security operations center starts to get all of these logs in, it's like, how do you start to normalize the data? How do you normalize the data the alerts that you are receiving from your EDR? What does that actually mean? And making sure that, there's that consistency with the data across the board. And so that when we're briefing leadership, we can actually brief what is the impact, what is the threat to the organization. The only way we're able to do that is really normalizing the data and really looking at the threat overall, so that, when we're making these decisions, whether to, disable something on the network or to bring something on the network, that leadership actually knows what's the impact to the mission.
Love the call out with the partnership with the CDO. You mentioned MFA, just for the listening audience. That means what, and what is that?
Multi-factor authentication. So essentially something you have to and there's very different ways to actually implement that on your network. And so, when we went back and looked at the various ways to authenticate, it actually stemmed from an incident that we had that kind of rushed us towards MFA, because we were just all PIV enabled, on our network. And so when we looked at Office 365 after one of our incidents, we were like, okay, well, we definitely have to implement that. And so now we're looking at phishing resistance and making sure that all the applications, not just at the network layer, but the applications that are also on the network, have MFA deployed within those applications too. And so I think that was like a piece that most people have, missed. They were just really looking at the network layer, but not looking at the various applications to make sure that that's integrated in there as well.
Really strengthening that identity management piece, which you all have highlighted, is so important. Mark, top priority for Illumio.
Yes, the top priority for Illumio for the coming time is to really deploy microsegmentation, help agencies and commands do that to stop adversary lateral movement, right? We've researched that about $170 billion has been spent in Zero Trust thus far, over the last several years, predominantly or most exclusively on the 3 of the 5 pillars of Zero Trust, right? ICAM, we've talked about that today. networks and devices. And while those are important, right, and many of us here, the folks on the government are in the middle of this, the challenge is that none of that investment is going to stop the next SolarWinds attack, right? SolarWinds attack was successful because it was creative and because the adversary, which was Russia, SVR, was able to have that Trojan horse and then move laterally in their organizations by unauthorized command and control domain calls. And so that basically meant that they penetrated the perimeter and then were able to move laterally. We know that the XDR, EDR tools did not stop those either, those lateral movements, because those tools are only as good as the information that you give them, right? So, you know, the modus operandi of those attackers, they're great tools, right? Don't get me wrong, for actually stopping the known threats. But in order to stop the unknown threats, you've got to be able to provide microsegmentation to the endpoint so that you can affect policy that only you want to be able to say that machine A or computer A talks to computer B, not to computer C.
Absolutely.
And if I can make one more comment, what we're seeing right now is that the attacks are going to have signatures of source code that's been stolen, right? So in SolarWinds, we had FireEye source code that was stolen, right? And then in the last 45 days, we had NVIDIA source code stolen. And we had, I think it was either Samsung or Android source code stolen as well. So what we're seeing is that these nation state attackers are going to inject malware into source code and actually dupe users or even administrators thinking that they're upgrading their software when in fact they're loading a malware that could remain hidden for a long time. And the only way to stop that is by micro-segmenting the network there.
Very sophisticated attacks. Vu, you're on a journey over there. You're on a tear, just like at the other agencies. What are your top priorities right now that you're focusing on for the remainder of this year?
So thank you, Luke, for the questions.
Sure.
So zero trust still remains as our top priority or our key priority for the upcoming year. So even though we've been working on the implementation of zero trust with limited resources, we found that it's critical to prioritize the effort. So within zero trust itself, our priority remains, migrating our users to the department identity provider. Continue deploying and installing our endpoint detection and response agent throughout the department, because that's gonna help us on the response part when there is an incident. And then lastly is, start migrating user and application under our zero trust architecture in a phased approach. And, fully implement zero trust capability at least to one information system.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you'll have it sort of end to end, if you will, a model that you can use to then start to roll the rest of that. And that's super impressive. I know it's been quite a journey for all of you. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.